Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. I rise to speak about the bushfire emergency that is currently underway in substantial parts of Queensland. Warm temperatures, low humidity and little to no rain during the winter months has meant that there has been an unpredictable situation ready to combust when wind came over the last week. The fires quickly became volatile and unpredictable. We mightn't be able to control those aspects of the weather, but what we have control over in those circumstances is how we respond to and manage those conditions. And I'm so proud to speak now about the excellent work of the Queensland Rural Fire Service volunteers. The Queensland Rural Fire Service has 36,000 volunteers who are spread across 93% of our state. And given that Queensland is huge and in places sparsely populated, this is an achievement that is quite extraordinary. The training these volunteers undertake is constant and it complements the work they do every bushfire season. They learn from their interstate counterparts. They lend a hand when there is trouble interstate. As at this morning, the Queensland Rural Fire Service indicated that there were 58 sites across Queensland with bushfire activity and one remaining bushfire at Peregium Beach on the Sunshine Coast. This is in stark contrast to the peak of the fire dangers over the weekend, when residents in the Cairns hinterland, Stanthorpe and Ballandine were all on high alert and evacuated from their homes. I want to tell the story of Julie Barnes, one of many residents affected by these circumstances, but she's a resident at a place called the Summit, just north of Stanthorpe. On Friday night at 11:45 p.m, Julie was woken by a police officer pounding on her door, telling her she needed to leave the area. The wind gusts were up to 90 kilometres an hour and had made the bushfires in the region so volatile that it wasn't able to be predicted how far it would go and in which direction. She said it was so windy, so unpredictable. The sparks were being blown quite a distance ahead of the fire, and the fireys didn't know what was going to happen. It was better for us to get out of the way. The fire had jumped the New England Highway and the road had been closed to traffic. Power had gone out at midday, and for the residents who used tank water, that meant they had no water either. Julie and other residents drove to Dalveen, where there was a functioning bathroom, an important resource, and other people were also parked there for that reason. Stayed there for an hour until they then had to move on to Warwick. Fortunately, the next morning the fire was downgraded and she was able to go home. Julie still had no power and therefore no water. She spent the day in Stanthorpe, stayed at a motel called The Vines that night. The owners of The Vines didn't charge anyone who was affected by the fires. In fact, no Stanthorpe motel did. It's the kind of generosity of spirit that I see so often in regional Queensland. When she returned home on Sunday morning, the power was back on. The Energex linesmen were doing a great job in trying conditions, with fire-damaged poles and high winds continuing. And since returning home on Monday, Julie and the residents of the Summit have been on a watch and act alert in case the fire regenerates and again poses a risk. And she has nothing but praise for the police and the community services who have helped out. But she has even higher praise for the Queensland Rural Fire Service volunteers who have saved so much property. She spoke of a house and shed on 45 acres of bushland at Applethorpe. She said, quite literally, there was nothing left but the house and the shed. In the circumstances, no small accomplishment. As tragic as it is to lose 16 properties, including the historic Binnaburra Lodge, and it is tragic, at least it is only 16. And thankfully, we haven't yet suffered a loss of life in Queensland. In New South Wales, a rural firefighter is stable after receiving burns to his hands and face, and he has a long recovery ahead of him. But thankfully, he has his life. Rural firefighters put their lives on the line for their neighbours, and often their own homes are in peril when they go off with their crews to help in other areas. Ben Naday is a member of the Tallabudgera Rural Fire Service in the Gold Coast hinterland. He joined because he wanted to contribute something meaningful to his local area. John Krause, who's the LNP member for the Scenic Rim, reports on the work of the Queensland Rural Fire Service in his area. Starting with the statement, in his usual blunt way, they've been at it for 6 days straight. On Thursday last week, they were called into Binnaburra and they've been on the ground since then, fighting the bushfires which have been taking swathes of bushland and which destroyed the Binnaburra Lodge. Some 50 trucks were deployed to this area and hundreds of local firefighters have used their expertise to minimise the damage. The wind has been too strong and the fires too unpredictable for them to have a perfect record. The planes doing the water bombing have been leaving Boonah Airfield and volunteers have done whatever they can to support the pilots and crews there. Southern Queensland will have a couple of days reprieve from the strong winds which have been blasting from the west since last Wednesday. The 5,000 residents of Peregian Beach evacuated overnight have been allowed to return home, and it is to the credit of the Queensland Rural Fire Service that only one house was lost in that area. One important house, but at least it's only one. The Bureau of Meteorology predicts the strong westerly winds to return on Friday, and we will have another weekend, I expect, of watch and act alerts. We're not out of the woods yet. But my thoughts and my prayers are with those who have suffered loss, and I thank and encourage the volunteers and community groups who are helping affected Queenslanders to, little by little, put back the pieces. It's hard to be here, knowing how much hardship you are all enduring at home.